Is the United States entering another forever war that could have significant negative impacts on the mental health of future veterans?
Listen up, gentlemen. This is vital intelligence we received from Dr. Sharma this morning. So take notes, because this will help you in the field.
I'm Dr. Sharma, physician, board-certified psychiatrist, and Air Force veteran. Since the United States has officially entered the war with Iran, joining in Israel's strikes against nuclear power facilities in the country, I wanted to speak on this because it's extremely important when it comes to veterans' mental health. My views on this topic have been colored by my service. As you guys know, I'm an Air Force veteran. I was a flight surgeon from 2011 to 2015. Now, a part that I don't discuss too often is that when I was deployed, I was in multiple locations for missions, including Qatar in the Middle East, Kandahar, Bagram, Mazar-i-Sharif in Afghanistan, and Djibouti in Africa. In the course of this time, I saw firsthand both the physical and mental impacts on our service members when it came to war and combat. Let me be clear. Combat and war is a reality of being in the military, no doubt about that. However, it has to be for the right reasons. We engaged in these forever wars in both Iraq and Afghanistan, where we had clear objectives that were not accomplished, especially in Afghanistan, where we spent 20 years and trillions of dollars to replace the Taliban with the Taliban. And in hindsight with Iraq, the events that happened were not for the right reasons. You might disagree with me on this, and I understand if you do, but we now know that we were lied to, especially when it came to the claim of weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. This, along with the many other lies we were told, has resulted in a lot of moral injury in veterans. This is a concept I talked about before on the channel, but basically moral injury is when something happens that conflicts with your deeply held beliefs and ideals. For a lot of us, our beliefs and ideals were shattered by the real reasons behind these forever wars. Blunders also in how the wars were waged, and lack of support for veterans when they got back. Now, here we are, entering another war. And you could say, well, the airstrikes are not aimed at regime change. Let's be real. Iran is a sovereign nation, and they will likely retaliate. So this will lead to an escalation over time. In fact, as I'm recording this, I just saw reports of Iran doing attacks around our bases in the Middle East, including Qatar. They might have already retaliated by the time this video is published. I hope I'm proven wrong. But are we really planning on giving PTSD and other mental health problems to the next generation of veterans for no good reason? Now, recently I talked to a veteran with a long history of service in law enforcement, and he told me something, which is that he really liked my content because I ask why. Why do these things happen? Why do veterans develop PTSD? Why do veterans have trouble sustaining long-term employment? Similarly, we have to ask why these events happened relating to Iran, the Iranian government and people. And I understand the current government there is an extremist theocracy. They are ruled by a hyper-religious minority. The government funds terrorist organizations like Hezbollah. I'm not denying any of that. But they didn't just wake up one morning and start chanting death to America for no reason whatsoever. And like I said before, we have to go back and see why Iran is in its current state. I'm going to give you a brief overview of this. What I'm about to tell you is critical for you to hear as an American and as a veteran. These are facts, not my opinions. Going back to August 1953, Iran had a prime minister, Mohammad Mossadegh, a man who was duly elected by the Iranian people through their parliament. Let me say that again. He was legitimately elected to be prime minister. He was well liked. Mossadegh was educated in France. He had a PhD in law. He was a professor. He was introducing a lot of reforms as prime minister: Social Security, land reforms, tax reform, and most importantly, nationalization of the Iranian oil industry. Because the West was profiting massively and giving very little to the country of Iran itself. This last part, them wanting to nationalize the oil industry, did not go over well with the British and the United States. There was a lot of profit to be lost if this trend continued. Like I say, always follow the money. Mossadegh was really concerned about foreign actors interfering with the affairs of Iran as they were doing, mainly the United Kingdom and United States, just like we would be concerned if a foreign government or governments were interfering with our affairs here in America. So what did our government do? The CIA sent over Kermit Roosevelt, grandson of Teddy Roosevelt, to orchestrate a covert coup and overthrow the duly elected prime minister. To do this, the operation poured massive amounts of money into creating an opposition in Iran where there was none. They essentially caused riots, unrest, and a civil war by paying people until the government was toppled. Once Mossadegh was arrested in this civil war, they reinstalled the Shah of Iran to have ultimate power over the country. They had made a deal with the Shah previously and planned all of this out ahead of time. If you want to hear the full story on this operation, check out the podcast called Redacted, hosted by Luke Lamanna, a Marine Corps veteran. He does a great job and he goes into intricate detail on this. Now, after the coup, the U.S. became the Shah's primary backer. They poured money into the government so that they could see the returns in the oil. They propped up his autocratic rule, a man who was not elected, by the way. Iran became a pro-Western power, providing the oil profits that the U.S. wanted and becoming a bulwark against the Soviet Union. But there was a problem. The Shah of Iran, just like a lot of monarchs, was autocratic and corrupt. He had the Savak, a secret police that squashed dissent and opposition. The Shah lined his own pockets, and Iran's oil wealth was not shared equitably. Even though Iran had a lot of potential with this oil, he could have reinvested into the country and done other reforms. The country fell into economic hardship and inflation. This shattered the public view of this government because in the end, people want stability and being able to take care of their own families just like us. The Shah lost support as the revolution gained momentum because people wanted wide-ranging reforms. Now remember, by this point, the Iranian people are already extremely frustrated with the United States since they toppled their democratically elected leader. Even more so now that the U.S. was supporting this extremely autocratic leader. In 1979, the Iranian Revolution toppled the Shah and brought Ayatollah Khomeini to power, transforming it into an Islamic republic. The new theocratic government denounced the United States as the Great Satan, and this is the government they still have in place today. But what a lot of people don't know is this. The U.S. backed the Shah, but as the revolution gained momentum, they flipped. Let me be clear, the U.S. did not create the Islamic Republic Revolution. That's not what I'm saying. But once it gained momentum, they allowed it to happen. This happened through a number of different steps: withholding military support, restraining Iran's army from intervening on behalf of the Shah, opening secret talks with Ayatollah Khomeini's camp without telling anyone else, and effectively greenlighting a transfer of power from the Shah to the Ayatollah. They chose not to prevent the Islamic Revolution's victory. At this point, experts agree that the U.S. at that time was overall caught off guard and scrambling in Iran. They were unprepared, and by the end of this debacle, they were trying to prevent a civil war or a communist takeover. Once again, the Iranian people, and I mean the people on the ground just trying to live their lives, were screwed over. After this point, there were many other events. I can't go into detail in each one or else this video would be several hours long, but it includes the hostage crisis in Tehran, the Iran-Iraq war, in which, by the way, the U.S. supported Saddam, to go against Iran. During that time, Washington supplied Saddam Hussein with intelligence, economic aid, and materials. They repeatedly clashed against Iranian forces in the region. The Iranian-backed Hezbollah did a brutal and terrible suicide bombing at the U.S. Marine barracks in Beirut in 1983. Sanctions were placed on the country repeatedly and are still present today. There was the Iran-Contra affair where senior U.S. officials arranged arms sales to Iran and then diverted those profits to fund the Contra rebels in Nicaragua. In 1988, a U.S. naval ship mistakenly shot down an Iranian airliner, killing all 290 civilians on board. There's a lot more, but the main point is that the coup of the duly elected leader that the CIA orchestrated initially in 1953 resulted in this cascade of events. And sadly, this is the legacy of the U.S. in Iran. My point with all of this is that the United States has repeatedly interfered with the affairs of Iran over time. And I think the overthrowing of Mossadegh was a critical juncture point that was, make no mistake about it, done purely for the motivation of money rather than wanting to have an actual functioning democracy in the region. We also have to consider how Iran has been treated over time. I'll give you guys an example. When I was deployed, we used to run missions from Qatar to Afghanistan all the time. I used to be hooked into the radio, listening to the chatter as we flew. We constantly flew into Iranian airspace simply to intimidate them. We used to violate their airspace on a regular basis. We would get warnings from Iranian ATC telling us to leave or else they would shoot us down. I heard all of this. And it wasn't just the planes I was on, it was also bomber aircraft and fighters who would do this. Obviously, the Iranians wouldn't fire. But I want you to take a moment and imagine something. Imagine if the US president, any US president, whoever you support, whoever, is overthrown. The foreign government incited a civil war that wasn't there, and they did this for profit to take money from our country. And then imagine this foreign government constantly interferes with the affairs of the United States, places crippling sanctions on the country to cause inflation, economic hardship for us, and also constantly sends bombers and fighters into US airspace to intimidate the military and people. I think it would be really easy for us to hate that foreign government that was doing all of this. And listen, the Iranian people are just like us. You can see this footage of an Iranian subway train ride. Majority of the country is middle class, going about their days, working, trying to make money and take care of their families. The Iranian people, the Persian people, have a rich heritage, and it's a group of people and country that we could have been allied with if we simply allowed them to determine their own path and partnered with them, allowed them to keep the person they elected in power so many years ago. But the US government wasn't interested in having a progressive democracy in the region. Imagine what all of this does to the people on the ground psychologically. Do you think it would be easy for them to trust us, especially if we invaded? And now here we are. B-2 bombers struck Iranian nuclear sites where the US intelligence community, including the Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, has said that the Iranian government has not been pursuing a nuclear weapon since at least 2003. You can look at this chart here on the left showing how much more effective diplomacy is at reining in Iran. You can see that the amount of enriched uranium at different levels dropped significantly after the deal in 2015, but after the deal was scuttled in 2018, it started increasing significantly. Of course, they don't have the 90% required for a nuclear weapon. The uranium they have is the kind that's used for nuclear power, and then the upper echelon is medical research and industrial research. Remember, enriched uranium is used for nuclear power all over the world, including here. And there have been voices saying Iran is 3 weeks away from having a nuclear weapon since 1995. And yes, Iran funds terrorist groups like Hezbollah. It would not be good for them to have a nuclear weapon. We all want less nuclear weapons, but the evidence shows that diplomacy is far more effective at limiting their enriched uranium than hostile action. And it wouldn't put our people in harm's way. Hostile action would actually cause them to reject inspections, hide their nuclear weapons program, go dark, just like North Korea. Then it becomes a black box. I'm extremely worried about this tit-for-tat back and forth and where this might lead. I'm worried about military service members who will be in harm's way for no good reason. This is not to protect the United States at all, by the way. And if this does get drawn into a wider conflict, I'm worried that our troops will be exposed to combat unnecessarily. Remember, we have bases in the Middle East, including Qatar, even Iraq, like al-Assad, and many others. They're using the same lie again, just like it was WMD in Iraq. They're doing the same thing with Iran. In fact, there are other countries with actual verified unsanctioned nuclear weapons programs, nuclear weapons that they have and already developed in that region and in Asia, and at least one, Pakistan, that has been actively funding terrorist groups since before 9/11. Imagine this playing out in Iran, and we can use the Iraq War as a blueprint. After the toppling of Saddam Hussein's regime, the country's infrastructure was torn apart, entire departments were dissolved, people were fired, the military was dissolved, and these folks then merged into the populace, and some of them joined different rebel and terrorist groups, and this resulted in a prolonged insurgency and the loss of thousands of lives of our service members and hundreds of thousands more when it comes to physical and mental injuries over time. Nobody wants this to happen again, and it will happen again if we get into yet another forever war in the Middle East. But the country has been thrust into the conflict unilaterally without congressional approval. Remember, these strikes were not targeting lone terrorist targets. They were striking nuclear facilities and uranium enrichment facilities of a sovereign nation. And for that, the American citizens should have a say in the matter, which means the decision should go to Congress. And like I say all the time, this isn't about left or right for me. I'm not either, and I don't get into that on the channel. I'm on the side of our military service members and veterans, and I'm worried about them. Let me know your thoughts on this topic in the comments. As always, I want to hear from you guys. Do you agree about this conflict? Do you disagree? Are you cheering for war? Are you hopeful or pessimistic? Let me know below. And if you do disagree with me, I do hope we can debate it out, since thankfully we live in a constitutional republic where we can have these types of discussions. If you enjoyed this video, you might like the episode I did on why veterans sometimes feel betrayed by their leaders. Click over here to check it out. Also, click over here to subscribe if you haven't already done so. As always, thanks for watching. Dr. Sharma signing off. See you next time.